Welcome to the podcast Rewind, Pause, Play with the UTS Women's Mentoring Group.
The purpose of the UTS Women's Mentoring Group is to provide opportunities for women of UTS to develop skills that focus on personal growth and leadership in a nurturing environment, promoting learning, mentoring, and support for career advancement initiatives.
As UTS continues to grow, we have more employees in different time zones, on various shifts, and of course with busy schedules. We decided to start this podcast so we could reach more of our employees on any day and at any time that's convenient to them.
Our goal is to increase the conversation about an array of topics with a diverse group of employees across our entire organization.
Whether it's walking on the treadmill, commuting to and from work, or maybe on your couch during quarantine, we are glad you're here with us.
As you listen, we'd love to get your feedback on topics you're interested in hearing about, or even an employee you would enjoy hearing from. Please feel free to email us at uwmg@utsnacks.com.
Al escuchar, nos encantaría obtener sus comentarios sobre los temas que estén interesados en escuchar, o tal vez conocen un empleado que disfrutarían escuchar en este podcast. No dude en enviarnos un correo electrónico a uwmg@utsnacks.com.
Welcome to our podcast, Rewind, Pause, Play with the UTS Women's Mentoring Group. If you've been here before, thank you for returning and listening to our latest podcast. If you're new here, welcome, and thank you for joining. We hope that you will go back and listen to our episodes before, which can be found on the UTS Internet and our UTS Women's Mentoring Group YouTube channel. I'm Ashley Burks, Customer Care Manager, and I'm pleased to be here with today's guest, Theresa Shea EVP, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've listened to all of your prior episodes, and I'm super honored to be asked to be on. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that I have for you out of the gate is what does your title mean? What is General Counsel and Corporate Secretary?
So general counsel is easier for people to understand than corporate secretary. So general counsel just means you're the lawyer for the company. And if in certain companies, if you're the general counsel, you have a team of lawyers underneath you. UTS is a lean organization, as you guys know. So I'm the first lawyer here that has been inside the company. And the reason you have an inside lawyer is to make sure that proactive risk aversion, risk minimizing work is happening within the company when business decisions are being made, as opposed to only going to your lawyers who are at an outside law firm when the problem has already happened. So it can be more cost effective. I help manage our outside lawyers. We've had an amazing partnership with the same firm for many, many years, who have handled all of our legal matters. But we have had our business people managing our legal work. And now I'm kind of the intermediary that helps to do that. I think a good general counsel is also really proactively, as I mentioned, involved in the business decisions that are being made. So that you can help say, this is where the legal pitfall might be that we could run into an issue with. And we could do this in a different way that might be a little bit less risky. One of my mentors, as an in-house lawyer, trained me long ago that you never say no to the business when they come to you as legal and ask if you can do something. Now, if somebody came to me and said, can I steal or can I murder someone? I would say, no, you cannot do that. But for the most part, that is a risky way of doing it. Let's see if we can find a less risky way of accomplishing your goal. So let's start with what the business goal is and see if there's a way that we can do it that will decrease the chances that we're going to end up in a lawsuit, end up with the government looking closely at what we're doing or having a concern about how we're doing it. And if you can help a company do that, then you're doing a good job, right? Because then you are decreasing the costs that the company is going to incur, not just in terms of money for outside lawyers, but time. Right. Legal disputes take time, and they take time from every single person who's involved with it, not just the lawyers. So if you can get ahead of that, both by being active in helping the business make good decisions, and then another big part of my role which you'll see more of me doing over the next year is getting out and training people. So helping people understand what some of these scary legal topics really mean in plain English, and what are some easy steps that you can take to understand those concepts and make sure that you're thinking about them as you're making your day-to-day decisions. You don't have to talk to me about all of your decisions. In fact, it would be impossible, right? Like there's a million decisions being made. But if you have a basic understanding of this is what it means when I sign a contract, this is what it means in terms of how I'm binding the company. If you have a basic understanding of why confidentiality matters and why we have to be cautious about what we share with external people with respect to the company's information. If you have that basic understanding, and if we get everyone in the company with that basic understanding, then you naturally have less legal problems. So it's a different kind of lawyering than being at a law firm and being in a courtroom, and it's more about being a partner to the business to help minimize how much legal issue the company has to deal with. The second part of my role is the one that people don't understand, and nor should you, but the corporate secretary role is actually a technical title that public companies are required to have. So corporate secretary means that I coordinate all of the board's activities. And it means that I take minutes at every board meeting, which are required under Delaware law to document what happened in each of the board meetings, which is more of an art than a science, right? And managing the board function entails a whole bunch of stuff. It entails coordinating the board meetings. It entails assisting the whole management team in terms of their interactions with the board, helping advise on what the board needs to give us authority to do and what we can do without their authority, which is not always crystal clear. So helping with all of that, and also helping with all of our kind of public filing and SEC related requirements, which is a big change from a private to a public company, and probably one of the biggest reasons that UTS decided to bring in general counsel to help with that work as well. So the corporate secretary function, it's kind of a clunky name, but it basically means that you are responsible for the formal record keeping that goes along with all of the requirements of a public company.
I think it's really interesting, especially with the goal of the podcast, and to understand and meet people and understand their roles and how they work within the organization. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We want to showcase everyone with their stories, and you had mentioned that background, and I've looked, we have your work experience. You've worked with law firms and with other companies as a senior counsel. How do you think, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how that kind of got you to the role that you're at today?
Yeah, I think, for most of us, I think if you say, tell me about yourself, you kind of go back to like, where did I come from? And how did I become this? How did I end up here?
Right.
And where I came from is a super small town, a farming town, and my whole family farmed. And I grew up specifically on a pig farm. Love that about my background. Like, I love that I have a small town background, even though I have spent my lifetime in Chicago. So the farm that I was on is less than an hour south of Chicago, but it's about 10 miles of cornfields from the most southern suburb. So you wouldn't realize that you can be that close to a major city, although maybe you would. I mean, it's not that different. I feel very comfortable here in Hanover because you come out of Baltimore, you come out of even Harrisburg, and quickly you're kind of in a rural place.
Yeah, I'm from Kansas City, and I'm from the city proper, but my family lives outside of the city and on farmland too. And I always found that to be the case about Hanover too. It does mingle well with the city, and so I feel that too. I always feel comfortable here.
Yeah, so I felt very comfortable kind of coming in the first time, like, okay, this feels normal to me. This feels like how I grew up. This feels like the type of environment I'm used to being in, and I like that small town background. My whole family is still there, and I'm very connected to that community, and credit it, I guess, a little bit with a work ethic that I think is, I'm thinking about my kids right now, and that's kind of lacking in today's youth, but I think, I grew up, I was just talking with Carrie DeVore last night, and he grew up in a farming area, not as small as mine, but he said my first job was detasseling corn. I'm like, oh, I walked beans. Like, I mean, so I started working when I was really young, and because that's just what you did. And it wasn't really work so much as you were helping with the business. So I was the first person in my family to go to college. Not many people leave my town. Like, most of them stay kind of in that community. But my grandmother, when I was in kindergarten, when I was debating something with her, told me that I was going to be the first lawyer in the family. She had grown up working in Springfield, Illinois, and working in politics, and so had been around a lot of lawyers. And she said that to me in kindergarten, and from then on, I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so I went to college at the University of Illinois, stayed in Illinois. And actually, in college, I was an English major, knowing I was going to law school, or at least hoping that I would be able to go to law school. Advisor told me that I should get a teaching degree because if law school didn't work out, you couldn't get a lot of jobs with an English degree. But that if I had a teaching certificate, then I would always know that I could get a job teaching. And also told me that it wasn't a lot of extra work, which was such a lie. Like, it was so much extra work and really hard. I mean, I love that I really understand how much we should respect our educators out there, how hard they work, how oftentimes little they are respected and credited for what they do.
It's an underrated position,
Oh my gosh.
100%.
Underrated in terms of pay and underrated in terms of respect.
Absolutely.
And for the criticality of what it does in terms of shaping like this world. So I taught for a year and a half, student taught, and then was hired to teach, and then and considered continuing with it because I really loved it and found it really rewarding. But I had my grandma's voice in my head, and actually voice in my ear, continuing to say, you're going to law school. So I ended up staying at the University of Illinois for law school. I taught an undergrad class while I was there, which allowed me to not incur debt while I was going, which was awesome. And continued teaching, which also was really good for me while I was in law school.
I think it's interesting that you have the teacher background because you had mentioned training earlier and how that is, so you're bringing that to the table here. And, I've been focusing a lot on training. And I think as an organization, we're really moving towards that as a goal for all of us. And so that skill is gonna help you out so much, right? Like, it's going to be huge.
I credit it with so much in terms of like advancing in my career as a lawyer in a company. I don't think it helped me half as much when I was at a law firm but when you're in a company and you can explain, I learned in my teaching education to break down a concept and explain it. Like, pretty much that's what you learn how to do. You learn how to break down a concept and explain it to people in a way that is manageable and that they can apply. That's the goal. So it's been invaluable in my role within companies as a lawyer because so much of legal is intimidating to people and sounds foreign to people, and they just kind of clam up and decide, I don't want to think about that. I should just avoid it. So I have really enjoyed trying to make it more understandable. And I do a lot of training in legal training. I do red flag training. You've heard me say this before, Ashley, but the goal of the training is not for you to understand every legal concept. You don't have to know the Supreme Court's opinion on, choice of law or which state's law applies. I just said choice of law, which is a legal concept. Which state's law applies? You don't have to know that. What you do need to know is when is the red flag there that you should get me involved? Like, when is it an issue that means you should? So you don't have to know the answer. You just need to know to raise your hand and say, I need help. And I have a whole different set of red flags, which when I get a question, I just said to Dylan yesterday, he asked me something. I'm like, that's a really good question. I've got to check with an expert on that. I don't have the answer. And it's okay to not have the answer. Like, you just need to be able to spot when you need to bring someone else in. So I try to focus training around that. Like, here's the basics, because if you understand the basics, it will make you feel less intimidated. And here are the red flags you need to watch for so that you know you need to get me involved. And I think if you break it down that way, it makes people more comfortable in saying, there's an intimidation and I don't know the answer, so I must not be doing something right that comes with legal concepts. So if you give people permission to say, you're not supposed to know, but spot the issue,
then there'll be more of that's expanding your army of people identifying red flags. That only helps, right?
So so that's my approach to training, and I think all of that comes from kind of the education background, which which I'm really grateful for. It was much more work than they suggested.
It is.
It is interesting though. Every one of my kids' parent-teacher conferences, within the first couple minutes, the teacher will say, "Did you teach?"
Oh,
like they can tell it's some sort of the way I ask the questions, or maybe the tone I'm using is different. They know that I get it, which I am proud of. Too, that I've kept that. So I then went to law school, and when I graduated, did what you kind of need to do if you want to end up in a business role like I'm in now, which is work at a law firm. It's just what people do after law school. And it's really hard to end up in this role if you don't have that training behind you. My focus was on labor and employment law, so lots of people issues. I did a lot of union work as well, and that was super interesting and tied into my background. My dad and brother were very heavily involved in their unions, and got a lot of teasing about the fact that I went to the dark side. But my dad, who has passed away a while ago, but he used to say to his buddies very strongly, "Paula's, we need good people on both sides of the table, and she's a good person," which is actually true, right? Like in order, whether it's union negotiations, a business negotiation, like if you can trust the person who's sitting across from you, even if you have different points of view, if you trust them and you believe they're a good person and that they're going to be honest with you, you can usually make it through most things. So I did that for about 6 years. I knew early on that that was not the life that I wanted long-term in terms of my career. It is billing your time in 6-minute increments. It is not being immersed with any one organization. You're just on call as a hired gun for anyone who needs you. And that doesn't mean you don't develop relationships, but I knew that I enjoyed more being in the middle of a business and on a team. Now, my husband has been at a law firm for 28 years. So everyone has a different perfect match for what works for them. He loves it, and that's exactly where he wants to be, but it just wasn't the right match for me. So I had decided I wanted to go in-house, which is really the job that every lawyer in a law firm says that they want. So I'm sitting in the seat that law firm lawyers want. So it's hard to get into that seat. I mention this because the role that I took was with United Airlines, which is a super fun and interesting company and industry. But I joined 3 weeks before they filed for bankruptcy.
Oh boy.
Knowing they were filing for bankruptcy, knowing they needed lawyers to help because they were filing for bankruptcy, knowing I was going to take a series of pay cuts, but also knowing that I was going to be in an in-house role and that it is much easier to move within that world if I wanted to. First of all, I believed in United and believed they'd survive, as they have, but also knew that this is my entrance. This is how, even very junior in terms of what a typical move to in-house is, I was given the opportunity in part because of where the company was. So I worked there for 5.5 years through their bankruptcy and did some really tough stuff, terminated pension plans and things that were, from a people perspective, so hard. I took a lot of pride in trying to be a good human being, even when I was delivering a tough message, and to be empathetic to how hard what had to happen was. That was the reality. It had to happen or the company wouldn't survive. But that doesn't make it any easier for the person across from you that's going to take a huge pay cut. So I stayed true to myself in terms of feeling like, well, at least if we have to deliver this message, I can do it in what I think is an empathetic and kind way, and hopefully make that not as hard.
Hey y'all, it's Ashley. We're going to pause for a second. Have you enjoyed these podcasts? I know I have. We're always looking for new, fun ideas. Have you asked yourself, I want to get involved but not sure where to start? Well, I've got great news for you. We have 4 different committees and we need your help, from education, philanthropy, employee engagement, and mentorship. Please email uwmg@utsnacks.com. Let us know how you want to help. Now, back to Rewind, Pause, Play.
You know, something that you and I have talked about separately, and it's that coming to terms with being a nice person and doing something icky. Like you've talked to me about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really hard for women. And I'm sure someone with your background, like you're an educator, you're relatable, you're easy to speak with, but then also that lawyer and the stigma of a lawyer. But has that been a challenge to navigate?
It has, but I think, well, I'll tell you what was hard. I think that I spent time early in my career thinking that, and having people affirmatively say to me, like, you're not angry enough and you're not fighting enough with the opposing side, and getting over the hurdle of trusting that I didn't need to be angry or confrontational in order to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
And to still get a good result and the best result. I could still be true to myself and get a result that I knew was the best possible for my client. And in fact, the way that I did it perhaps sometimes got us further than if I had been screaming at people across the table. But I did feel some pressure early in my career to be harsher and not be. Sometimes people view someone who is nice as not being strong.
Right.
And I think you have to accept and own the fact that you can be both and not be apologetic about it. Like, nope, this is who I am. I'm strong. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, regardless of your political views, was an incredible kind of female pioneer in law. My favorite quote from her, and I was a young lawyer when I first heard it, and it affected me profoundly, was, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think she lived by that.
Yeah.
And I believe in that. There's lots of things I disagree with people on all the time. And there's sometimes you can't come to a resolution and but I want to be able to be true to kind of being a decent human being in terms of my interactions regardless. And that means that I come across as nice, but it doesn't mean I'm weak.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think you have to grow into that and grow into the confidence that comes with, I don't have to be a particular shape to be successful. This, to be clear, would be much harder for me if I had stayed at a law firm. That type of lawyering requires more aggressive action. And so I don't think it's by chance that I have ended up in the role that I am in. So I was at United for those 5.5 years. During that time, I had 3 children within 18 months. I had twin boys, and then 9 months later had another boy. At that time, the airline industry was incredibly tumultuous. I was given an opportunity to go to a less tumultuous industry. I remember my husband saying, but it seems so much less exciting. And I had 3 kids under 2 and felt lots of excitement in other areas of my life. Plus, it was a promotion. And it was an increase in pay, and it was more responsibility. And so, all of these things together, even though it was a smaller company than United, putting all of that together, it was kind of a no-brainer. Like, this was the right move for me to take. So I moved to True Value, which is a hardware company. I see lots of similarities to our network in terms of how we distribute product, because True Value is 5,000 independent hardware store owners. Mm-hmm. None of them owned by corporate. They're all independently owned, and they just buy from us, and we sell to them, and we influence how they sell, but we don't control it, similar to RIOs. Mm-hmm. So I started there as their labor and employment lawyer and kind of built out that function, and was there for 9 years in that role, and then was promoted to general counsel, which was super exciting and challenging and interesting. It helped prepare me for this role because leading labor and employment law, and it's kind of like a doctor. Like, I am the ear, nose, and throat doctor, as opposed to being the general practitioner or the head of the hospital that's overseeing all of the doctors. And so as the general counsel, you touch every area of the law, and you have to have some knowledge in each area. So it was a stretch for me when I first moved into the role in terms of getting outside of my comfort zone and learning about areas of the law that I hadn't worked in before. I was very used to being the expert in my world, but it was the right time for that stretch. I also, as many of us do, went from having a bunch of colleagues that I hung out with all the time and commiserated with to supervising them and to doing their performance evaluations, which is an interesting step too, and a challenge kind of personally and professionally. So all of that was good development for me. I was in that role for about 3 years when I learned of the UTS opportunity. I loved True Value. I really loved every place that I've worked so far, but I think there's a point when you might realize it's time for a change. I was ready, without saying anything negative, I was ready to be at a growing company. I was ready to be at a company that was building as opposed to not building. And I'll just leave it at that. But I was super excited about that opportunity.
I think that's what's so attractive about us. I know personally, I left the banking world, and when I came here, I was like, this is so exciting. And I know it sounds so, snack food is fun, and we're growing so much, and here I am, I'm coming up on 10 years, and I'm like, wow, that like flew. And if I look back to where I started, where I'm now, I mean, it's still exciting and it's still growing. And that same wonder I had coming in, even 10 years later, is still there, which is so amazing to me, because I've worked in corporate banking for a long time prior to that. And it is not, when you're in the corporate world, you can, that creativity that's not growing necessarily, but dealing with the issues, just issue after issue, it can be stifling. I think is the way I would put it. Not a growth mentality necessarily, not an exciting, like, we're like Sean calls us like a little startup in the business, but I can see that in every department I've ever spoken with within this organization. Your department, is a growth, it's a startup in its own way, because we didn't have it before. So
yeah, I felt the enthusiasm from the beginning. I wasn't, I kind of came into the opportunity not sure that I was happy where I was. I wasn't sure that I wanted to make a move. But I was wowed by the kind of both the enthusiasm and drive, but yet also kind of the culture of being just like good people, which is really important. That sounds so simplistic when I say it, but it actually really matters if you feel like this is a place made up of good people who have good values. And for my role, it's really important because I own the code of conduct, right? Like, I own compliance for the company. I'm the corporate compliance officer. I would never join a company that I didn't have a strong feeling that was a critical value for them, that ethics mattered, that doing the right thing mattered. And that has proven true. I mean, I've been here 6 months. I don't know everything, but what I have learned in those 6 months is that we don't have a ton of legal problems. And I don't think it's because we always knew every single thing to do the exact perfect way. I think it's because we tend to do the right thing. We tend to want to treat our partners, whether it's associates or vendors or customers, we tend to, as a company, we have tried to treat people well and to do what we think is right. And it's simplistic, but when you do that, do you still end up with some legal heartache? Yes, that's the world we live in, but it is much less and much easier for someone in my role to deal with than if you have something at the core that isn't that solid. So all of those things made me interested. It's interesting the time that I was recruited. I don't know if the company would have looked for a general counsel that didn't live in Hanover, if it wasn't COVID time when everyone had gotten used to the fact that people didn't have to be in person. So you wonder.
Do you think that will have, like, is that part of you? So thinking about our culture, because we're talking about it, but do you think that's part of the impact that you'll have on the ever-changing culture here, is the working remotely?
I think we already had a pretty solid presence of that in the executive team. I think it is starting to kind of trickle down more throughout the organization. And even people who live in Hanover are choosing to embrace the flexibility of being able to balance their life a little bit more easily by working some at home and some in the office. I don't know that I will impact it as much as the world has changed, and I benefited from it, right? I don't know that I would have been considered because the world used to be different. But I'm really, I'm grateful that I was. I'm here about once a month in Hanover. And even when I'm here, sometimes I'm in my office here on a Teams meeting with other people who are in their offices here. So you truly get the sense that, while I want to be here and I like the in-person interaction, it is not a requirement of today's business world to have that consistently. So yeah, I have found it to be really pretty seamless and easier than I expected. I do go out of my home to an office to work simply because that's better for me kind of psychologically to like get up and get out. So, everyone has a different sweet spot, I think. And this circumstance has allowed us to just realize some people really do want to be in an office 5 days a week, and that's okay too. Like, it's all about where you are most effective and efficient and able to best balance your life.
If you could tell us more about let me think about how I want to put this. I'm trying to think of, because I kind of like merged some of my questions together. So I kind of want to go into it. Like, do you have any thoughts of where you want to go, like in the future with your role? And like, I know you've talked about the training portion of it, and like how we're ever changing cultures, and what's the impact you're expecting to have on by being here? I know we've talked about it quite a bit, but do you think, is there anything that stands out to you that you're like, yes, this is my passion?
I think, well, first of all, I came into the company not knowing, without ever having an in-house lawyer, I was like, the train might be off the tracks when I start. Like, I don't know how much they're going to need. And as I mentioned a minute ago, I've been pleasantly surprised by, first of all, how much kind of pseudo lawyering that everyone within the company was doing, and the fact that they did it well. And I'm not surprised by that because it's very capable people. But typically, if you don't have a lawyer and a legal function, some of those things slip in terms of priority. I didn't see that here. Are there things that I think I can help with in terms of efficiency, in terms of helping people feel more comfortable that they have a partner, that they aren't making a decision out there on their own? So if you're in the middle of a dispute with a vendor and you're not sure which way to go, knowing that I can talk you through it and that at the end you can be like, legal is with me on this, I think is helpful for people. And that is something that I hope to provide as support. Organization, which will lead to efficiency around our board functions, helping to just put more structure in place in terms of some of our policies and procedures. Nothing here at UTS is broken. It's just making it a little bit more organized and a little bit more streamlined, I think. And I do think that the training will help people feel less intimidated on a day-to-day basis. I think we'll decrease some of our spend because we won't be paying for the hour for every legal opinion that we receive. It doesn't mean we still won't need outside lawyers. I just told you I have my own red flag system where I have to ask outside experts for help on things. So we'll still use that, but it'll be less. In terms of my department, I have been lucky enough to kind of grab is the wrong word, but convince a couple of people who already had roles within the company to come into my new legal department that I was trying to form. So Kevin Brick and Christine Yealy, both of whom have been with the company forever. And I teased them that both of them were people who, when you didn't know where else to go within the company, they would come to Christine or to Kevin. And that is often what legal is. Legal, I'm like, you're perfect for the role because that's exactly what legal does. Like, you get a letter and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, right? Mm-hmm. You get a really difficult customer complaint. I don't know how to handle this. So we become a department that can help sort through the things that either have a legal component to them or that we just don't know how to deal with. So I have been lucky enough to have them join the team, and they had been doing very heavy lifting in terms of coordinating the legal work before this point, and have just formalized that a little bit more. At some point, might we expand with more attorneys? Maybe. I'm still sorting through that, right? I want to make sure that if and when we hire someone, it is going to serve the company in the best way possible. So me learning what all the legal needs of the company are is something that's going to take a little time. So I've had lots of people say to me, when are you going to hire some lawyers underneath you? And I don't know that I don't know for sure that I will. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of legal work that we could probably do here as opposed to having assistance with outside. But I need more time to sort through that and understand the work and the consistency of the volume of the work before we just start adding people.
Right.
So right now, I think I'm pretty excited to have our party of 3 in the legal department.
I have relied on both of those individuals personally for our department for customer care for a long time. Kevin actually used to report to Kevin, so we go way back, and I do know that they do know their stuff. That is for sure.
Yeah, and they have been doing, very involved legal work all along. They just didn't have a lawyer in the company that
Right.
was managing it. So yeah, we have lots of projects in terms of what our training plan looks like, beefing up our contract management system. I mean, there's lots regulatory. So Kevin's been working very hard on putting together kind of one-page sheets on all of our major labeling issues. So we talk a lot about doing training that will be bite-sized, so half hour or less, and letting people leave with one page that summarizes the main points. Because people can't absorb 6 hours worth of training.
We're in a totally different era than we've ever been,
Totally.
where we're visual people. Look at the holes we get into on social media where you're just video after video after video, and they're seconds. Like, if you're over 30 seconds now, you almost are losing people, which is insane.
It's crazy. But we need to boil it down into something people can walk away with and then use as a resource. So I think you'll see more of that coming out of our department. We have a page on the internet, and we'll be adding kind of training materials to that. So I think what we'll try to do is not just be who you come to when you have a problem, but rather someone and a group that can help you learn so that we can avoid those problems.
What advice would you tell your younger self?
I would tell myself to be more confident earlier than I became confident. And sometimes I have to still say that to myself today, like to be more confident in who I am, and that who I am and the values that I have work for business and work for my role. I also would say you can have it all. And you can't have it all perfectly. And there will be days that it feels like you're not doing any of it as well as you would like to in terms of managing family. And I don't just mean children, I mean spouses and parents and siblings and community and all the things that are important to us in life, and challenging and interesting work. It is hard to balance, particularly at certain points in the development of yourself and the development of your family, but you can make it work. And you have to be kind to yourself and appreciate that it's not always going to be perfect. And yet you're setting such an amazing example. I think of my boys and them seeing me as being kind of someone who is strong and who both manages our home and is successful at work. And that's powerful for boys to see and for them to know that is possible. It isn't right for everyone. I have many friends that have chosen a different path, and that's part of the beauty of it too, is respecting either choice and realizing that both are to be appreciated and to be admired. My choice was to try to do both. I'm proud of that choice, and I don't have to feel guilty about that choice. There are days that I feel that way, but overcoming that, I think, and being proud and being confident in the decision that I made is something that I wish I had realized earlier. And being a little bit easier on myself, that it all isn't going to be perfect every day, but I'm giving it my best, and that's enough.
Yeah, I would say during the pandemic, that was really hard for some of us with younger kids. I know that I had a kindergartner at the beginning of this and a preschooler, and then they transitioned into, now they're in elementary. And I would say there were many days that I felt like I was failing, but what I would say to myself, I'd forgive myself. At the end of the day, I'm like, you're just going to have to forgive yourself. It came to the point where if I tried to juggle it all and feel like I was failing at one job or the other, I couldn't. It changed when I started to just say, I forgive myself and just move on.
Yeah.
I think that's when I've really learned to come to terms, and everything has gotten better.
Yeah. Well, and I think then you can just, instead of spinning in your own brain about what didn't happen, you can just focus on what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And do your best with that, and that energy goes in a different direction. So, yeah, I wish I realized that earlier. I think I'm fully embracing it now, but it took me a while to get here. So,
Yeah, I could see that. Pandemic heightened that, right? We probably would have had that irregardless.
yeah. And in some ways, the ability to work at home can be even more challenging that way because you're that much more accessible to the other people in your life who might want to pull you into something else. So, deciding what the right balance is for you is important.
Well, I really appreciate you sitting down with us today. I think you're so easy to talk to, and I think that's really great for someone who's we need to feel comfortable coming to you when we have problems, and I think that's evident, no doubt. I appreciate all that you do here, and I think the Women's Mentoring Group are really happy to hear you today. And we thank you. Thank you so much for sitting down.
Thank you. And thank you for having this group. I've been involved in various diversity groups in the companies that I've worked with, and I was super pumped to see that we already had such a solid presence here at UTS. So excited to be involved going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Rewind, Pause, Play with the UTS Women's Mentoring Group. Please feel free to email us at uwmg@utsnacks.com for any questions or comments. We hope you enjoyed this podcast.